Questions on non-steroid hormone action? The last general thing before we go into specific hormones is regulation of hormone levels. We use negative feedback for most of them. In case you've forgotten this one from 101 or you had an instructor who didn't stress it, I'll review the homeostatic loop. So you've got three structures in the body that respond to and make changes when homeostasis is off. A receptor that detects the information, a control center that decides what to do about it, and an effector which does something to fix it. The information that the receptor picks up is a stimulus. The effects of the effector are the response. And often, the purpose of the response is to get rid of the stimulus. In the endocrine system, there's two major types of stimulus. One of them is hormone concentration. For example, something like testosterone, after puberty, is kept at constant levels. So if it goes up or down, then the mechanism kicks in to adjust it. With most hormones, it's some kind of change in the conditions in the body. For example, blood glucose is high, so insulin is released to get it out of the blood. You'll also see this with things like blood pressure, water balance, and so on. This is going to be our major mechanism, is we're watching out for what's going on in the body, and we use a hormone to fix it. How we get from the stimulus to the response, the details in here have three major mechanisms in the endocrine system. One is tropic hormones, where one gland controls another. So you have your first gland, that's the control center. It's going to release a hormone that controls another gland. That other gland releases a hormone that controls the effectors. In some cases, the nervous system can directly stimulate a gland. And this will be short-lived, where we're just going to spit out some of this hormone while the signal's coming in, and then we stop. A big place you see this is epinephrine or adrenaline. The sympathetic nervous system stimulates the adrenal medulla, which is what makes epinephrine. And then the epinephrine enhances those sympathetic effects. We'll talk more about epinephrine coming up. This is why your heart stays faster for a little bit longer after you're done being startled, is you've got the hormone there, and its effects last for a couple of minutes rather than just seconds. There's also direct response, where the gland monitors the environment itself. And in cases 1 and 3, often the receptor and the control center are the same gland. For example, the cells of the pancreas that make insulin monitor blood sugar levels and decide whether they should release insulin. So here's a little closer look at each of those. And I'm going to get us a new diagram. So, with tropic hormones, we have a basic pattern of 3 glands. The first 2 are always the same. We have the hypothalamus, which is the receptor and control center. It secretes a hormone. Now, there are names of these given in the textbook. Most of them are called releasing hormones of some kind. Blank RH is usually their name. I'm not going to ask you to remember any of them. The releasing hormone stimulates the pituitary gland. And you may have heard before the pituitary gland called the master gland because it controls several other glands, but the hypothalamus is the master of the master. So it's pituitary is king, but the hypothalamus is the power behind the throne, the advisor or the queen or something. Then the pituitary gland releases another hormone. We'll just call that hormone number 2 for now. Hormone number 2 stimulates the target gland, and then its hormone, number 3, is going to stimulate the effectors, and it's going to inhibit the pituitary and the hypothalamus. And that's because of the hormones taking longer to take effect. If we waited until the problem was corrected to stop making the hormones, we'd overdo it. So this is kind of like the big boss says to the little boss, hey, we need to do this. So the little boss says to the worker, we need to do this. And the worker says, okay, I'm on it, and then does it. And we'll go through a couple of examples of this as we get to the pituitary. Questions on tropic hormones? With the nervous system, we have some structure in the brain, usually, that monitors the variable. And sometimes that's the hypothalamus, too. Other times it's the medulla oblongata. Those are the two most common. And then neurons take a signal to the gland and tell it to secrete. The hormone stimulates the target cells, which are the effectors. They fix the problem, which tells the control center in the nervous system, we don't need to do this anymore. So this is generally found with fast-acting hormones, and that's why we don't need to block the starting signal like we do here. Then the direct response, we've got one gland is the receptor and control center. It secretes when necessary, when the variable it's monitoring is outside the correct range. Then the hormone stimulates some target cells to fix the problem, and that's where you get your negative feedback. So same situation here where it's just fixing the stimulus that provides the negative feedback. In some cases, you'll have one gland or one cell type within the gland that fixes something if it gets too high, and then a different one that fixes it if it gets too low. And we'll see 2 examples of that in the chapter. So any other questions on hormone regulation? Before we do the specific hormones, we're going to do our first focus activity, which takes some examples, and everything's laid out in there so you don't have to go, but I didn't learn this hormone yet. And we're going to match them up with, oh no, is there an extra anywhere? copy of this. I swear I need the right number. Let's see. I do have a spot for multiple names on it, so if two of you don't mind turning it in together. All right, from now on I'll make extra copies of everything. So this is a type of critical thinking exercise where you're going to take the information you have, which is the little story given there, and combine it with the information you have on how homeostasis works and mash them up. What's the stimulus? What's the control center? So 2 notes about this. In the endocrine system, as I said, the receptor and control center are often the same structure. And in this example, they are. But then what happens on this arrow is also important. Getting from the control center to the effector. And we'll call that the messaging. So for each of those 2 stories, you need to have stimulus, the receptor and control center, how the message gets to the effectors, who are the effectors, and what do they do. I'll give you a few minutes to work on the first one, then we'll go over it together. And then the second one you can do during break or in lab or for homework. Turn it in next time.